Beloved, you'll marry him. But not until you finally understand what the silence you two had meant. Listen, I need you to lean in close, because what I'm about to share with you is going to change everything you thought you knew about love, relationships, and God's timing. You've been in that space, haven't you? Everything was flowing beautifully. The conversations were deep. The connection was real. You felt that peace that surpasses understanding. You prayed about him. You got confirmations. You even had dreams that felt prophetic. And then, silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from disrespect or games, but that thick, heavy, unexplainable quiet that makes you question everything you thought God showed you. Your heart is racing right now because you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've replayed every conversation, analyzed every text message, wondered if you said too much or moved too fast. You've been asking God why. He would show you someone just to have them disappear into silence. But what if I told you that silence wasn't a mistake? What if that quiet season wasn't God changing his mind, but God changing you? What if the very thing that's been driving you crazy is actually the thing that's preparing you for the love you've been praying for? Family, I've been walking with God for over 2 decades, and I've seen this pattern play out in countless lives. The silence isn't the enemy of your love story. The silence is your love story, and today, I'm going to break down exactly what God is doing in those quiet seasons, why he allows them, and how understanding this will transform not just your relationship, but your entire approach to love and covenant. If this resonates with your spirit, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now, because over the next 45 minutes, I'm going to give you 7 revelations that will shift your perspective forever. This isn't just relationship advice. This is prophetic insight into how God builds lasting love. And by the end of this message, you're going to understand that you will marry him, but not until you finally understand what the silence meant. So grab your journal, get comfortable, and let's dive deep into the heart of God concerning your love story. Number 1, the silence is God's mirror for your soul. The first thing you need to understand is that his silence was never about him rejecting you. It was about God revealing you. When that man stepped back, when the texts stopped coming, when the good morning messages disappeared, God wasn't punishing you. He was positioning a mirror in front of your soul. See, we live in a culture that teaches us that consistency in communication equals commitment. But God operates on a different frequency. He knows that before you can handle covenant, you need to confront the places in your heart that are still seeking validation from man instead of rest in him. When he went quiet, what happened to your peace? Did it remain stable, or did it crumble? When the affirmation stopped, did your identity stay intact, or did you start questioning your worth? This is what the mirror revealed. God was showing you that your emotional stability was still tied to someone else's attention. And beloved, that's dangerous territory for a future wife, because marriage isn't built on constant reassurance. It's built on unshakable identity in Christ. The silence exposed your emotional patterns, your triggers, your default responses to uncertainty. It showed you how quickly you reached for control when you felt things slipping. It revealed how icily you interpreted delay as denial. Most importantly, it showed you that your peace was still circumstantial rather than spiritual. Isaiah 32:15 says, "In quietness and trust is your strength." You thought your strength was in clarity, in consistency, in constant communication. But God said, "No, daughter, your strength is in trust." Trust that doesn't require constant proof. Trust that doesn't waver when circumstances shift. Trust that remains steady even when the other person is working through their own process. This mirror wasn't meant to shame you. It was meant to shape you, because every woman who walks into covenant needs to know where her security truly lies. If a man's silence can send you into emotional chaos, you're not ready for the deeper challenges that marriage will bring. But if you can remain peaceful, prayerful, and purposeful even when you don't understand what's happening, you're becoming the kind of woman who can handle anything. The silence forced you to ask the hard questions. Was my joy in Christ or in connection? Was my peace real or just circumstantial? Was I seeking a husband or seeking healing? And when you can answer those questions honestly, when you can look in that mirror and see both your wounds and your worth, that's when transformation begins. That's when you stop being a woman who needs a man to complete her and start becoming a woman who chooses to complement him. The mirror was necessary. Beautiful one, because what God builds in secret stands strong in storms. Number 2, his silence was his processing, not his rejection. Here's what most women don't understand about men. We process pressure differently than you do. Where women often talk to heal, men often go silent to survive. When he stepped back, you saw distance, but he felt weight. You noticed quiet, but he was carrying questions he didn't have words for yet. His silence wasn't a sign that he was losing interest. It was a sign that he was wrestling with something deeper. Maybe it was the pressure to be the man he believes you deserve. Maybe it was fear about his ability to provide and protect. Maybe it was the weight of knowing that pursuing you means stepping into a level of responsibility he's never carried before. Men carry things in silence that women sometimes don't even notice. The expectation to have all the answers, to never show weakness, to be strong even when they feel fragile inside. His silence was his way of saying, I care too much to mess this up. He wasn't ignoring you. He was honoring the weight of what you represent. He wasn't running from you. He was running to God, seeking wisdom, asking the question every real man asks, do I have what it takes to lead her well? But here's where it gets tricky. If your response to his silence is panic, pressure, or pursuit, you'll interrupt a process that God was using to mature him. You'll turn his sacred space into a source of stress. You'll make him feel like he has to choose between processing his thoughts and managing your emotions. And that's not fair to either of you. God allowed the silence because he was developing both of you simultaneously. He was teaching you patience while teaching him purpose. He was growing your discernment while growing his determination. He was building your trust while building his confidence. This is why rushing to fill the silence with assumptions is so dangerous. You'll misread his season and mislabel his intentions. You'll see rejection where God was orchestrating reflection. You'll interpret his need for space as a lack of commitment, when it's actually evidence of how seriously he's taking the possibility of commitment. Real men don't retreat because they don't care. They retreat because they care deeply. They don't want to pull you into their storm. They want to conquer it before inviting you into their peace. This is what covenant requires: the ability to love someone through their becoming, not just celebrate them in their arrival. The ability to pray for someone's process without pressuring them through it. The ability to trust God's timing even when you don't understand the season. His silence was his struggle, not against you, but for you, for the man he's trying to become, for the legacy he's trying to build, for the purpose he's trying to protect. And your response to that silence will determine whether you become a safe place for his growth or a source of stress in his journey. Number 3, the silence revealed your idol, not your inadequacy. This is going to cut deep, but it needs to be said. The reason his silence hurt so much wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because he had become too much. Too much of your peace, too much of your joy, too much of your sense of security and identity. Without realizing it, you had made him an idol. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but subtly. The way idolatry always creeps in. You started looking to him for what only God can provide. You began needing his attention to feel valuable, his messages to feel secure, his presence to feel peaceful. And God, in his mercy, allowed the silence to expose what your heart was actually worshipping. See, idolatry isn't just bowing down to golden calves. It's making anything other than God your source of stability. It's looking to creation instead of the Creator for your identity. It's needing a human to say what God has already declared over you. When he went quiet, your world shook, not because he was your foundation, but because you had made him your foundation. And foundations built on people will always crumble under pressure. God saw this happening and said, "Not on my watch." He loved you too much to let you build your future on sand. So he allowed the silence to reveal the truth. Your heart had become divided. Part of it belonged to God, but part of it was bowing to a man, and God is too jealous for your affection to allow that to continue. The silence wasn't punishment. It was purification. God was cleaning house in your heart, removing the idols, resetting your priorities, realigning your worship. He was teaching you that your worth isn't determined by who chooses you. It's declared by who created you. Your value isn't measured by who pursues you. It's established by who purchased you with his blood. Your identity isn't found in being someone's girlfriend. It's rooted in being God's daughter. This is why the silence was so necessary. Because marriage is meant to be the overflow of your relationship with God, not the source of it. You're supposed to bring wholeness to the altar, not seek it there. You're called to be complete in Christ before you become one with another. The silence forced you to confront the places where you had made that man your peace instead of letting God be your peace, where you had made his approval your confidence instead of resting in God's approval, where you had made his presence your joy, instead of finding your joy in the Lord. And when you can honestly say, even if he never calls again, God is still good, that's when you know the idol has been broken. When you can declare, my peace doesn't depend on his presence. That's when you know your worship has been purified. When you can rest in God's love, even when you don't feel man's love. That's when you're ready for covenant. Because covenant isn't about doing complete people completing each other. It's about to whole people choosing to complement each other. Number 4, God. Use the silence to develop your discernment. The silence wasn't just about what God was removing from your heart. It was about what he was developing in your spirit. Discernment, the ability to perceive what's happening in the spiritual realm even when the natural realm looks confusing. The capacity to hear God's voice, even when man's voice goes quiet. The wisdom to distinguish between divine delays and human games. Before the silence, you were operating primarily on emotion and assumption. You were reading situations through the lens of your feelings instead of through the filter of faith. You were interpreting his actions through your insecurities instead of through God's sovereignty. But the silence forced you to develop a different kind of sight, spiritual sight, the ability to see beyond what's happening, to understand why it's happening, the capacity to look past the surface circumstances, to perceive the deeper purposes, the wisdom to recognize that God's ways are not our ways, and his timing is not our timing. During the silence, you had to learn to hear differently. Instead of listening for his voice, you had to tune in to God's voice. Instead of waiting for his confirmation, you had to rest in God's promises. Instead of seeking clarity from him, you had to find peace in the mystery of God's plan. This is prophetic training. Beloved, God was teaching you to operate as a seer, not just a feeler. To function as a prophet over your own life, not just a participant in your emotions. To walk in spiritual authority, not just emotional reactivity. Because when you marry him, you're going to need this discernment. There will be seasons when he's struggling with things he can't articulate, moments when he's processing pressures you can't see, times when he's fighting battles you don't understand. And if you don't have discernment, you'll misinterpret every season. You'll take personally what's actually spiritual. You'll assume the worst, when God is working for the best. You'll panic when you should pray, pressure when you should pause, react when you should respond. But the woman who learned to discern during the silence, she becomes a prophetic voice in her home. She doesn't just see what is, she perceives what's coming. She doesn't just react to circumstances, she declares God's promises over them. She doesn't just survive the storms, she speaks peace into them. The silence was your training ground for this kind of spiritual authority. It taught you to pray before you panic, to seek God before you seek answers, to trust the process even when you don't understand the purpose. It developed your ability to perceive the difference between a divine pause and a human game, between a seasonal silence and a permanent separation, between God's preparation and the enemy's distraction. This discernment will serve you for the rest of your life, not just in marriage, but in every relationship, every decision, every season of uncertainty. You learn to hear God's voice in the quiet, and now you'll never be without his guidance again. The silence developed your spiritual senses, and now you can navigate any situation with wisdom, peace, and power. Number 5. The silence was divine preparation for covenant. Wait, marriage isn't just about finding someone to share your life with. It's about becoming someone capable of carrying covenant weight, and covenant weight is heavier than most people realize. It's the weight of being responsible for someone else's heart, dreams, and destiny. The weight of standing strong when they're weak, believing when they doubt, hoping when they're discouraged. The weight of loving someone through their worst seasons, not just celebrating them in their best moments. The silence was God's way of preparing you for this weight. Because if you can't handle the uncertainty of a quiet season, how will you handle the complexity of a lifelong covenant? If you crumble when communication gets inconsistent, how will you stand when life gets chaotic? If you lose your peace when you don't understand what's happening, how will you provide stability when storms come? God was building your capacity for covenant through that silence. He was teaching you to love without needing constant reassurance, to trust without requiring constant proof, to remain steady when circumstances are shifting, to find your strength in him when human strength fails. During the silence, you learned to pray for someone you couldn't hear from, to believe in someone you couldn't see, to hope for someone who seemed distant, to intercede for someone who wasn't. Communicating this wasn't just about that season. It was training for marriage, because there will be times in covenant when your husband is silent, not because he doesn't love you, but because he's processing something heavy, not because he's shutting you out, but because he's working something through, not because he's losing interest, but because he's carrying weight you can't see. And in those moments, you'll need the strength you developed during this silence. The ability to love him through his processing without taking it personally. The wisdom to pray for him instead of pressuring him. The maturity to give him space without assuming the worst. The faith to trust God's work in his life even when you can't see it. The silence taught you that covenant isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does. It's not about constant communication. It's about consistent commitment. It's not about perfect understanding. It's about persistent love. You learned to carry hope when circumstances looked hopeless, to maintain faith when feelings were fair, HLESS, to choose love when logic suggested otherwise. This is the foundation of lasting marriage, not the ability to avoid difficult seasons, but the capacity to navigate them with grace, not the skill to prevent silence, but the strength to steward it wisely. The silence was your boot camp for covenant. It developed your spiritual muscles, strengthened your emotional core, and prepared your heart for the weight of lifelong love. Now when you walk into marriage, you won't just be bringing excitement and emotion. You'll be bringing the kind of maturity that can weather any storm, the kind of faith that can believe through any season, and the kind of love that can last through any challenge. Number 6, the silence exposed your readiness for spiritual warfare. Here's something most people don't talk about. Marriage is spiritual warfare. When two people come together in covenant, they're not just joining lives. They're combining destinies. They're creating a force that the enemy wants to destroy before it even begins. And the silence, it was your first taste of this warfare. The enemy knew that if you and this man came together in God's timing and God's way, you would be dangerous to his kingdom. So he whispered lies during the quiet moments. He's not that interested. You misheard God. You're not worthy of this kind of love. This was all in your imagination. The silence became a battlefield for your mind, and how you fought during that season determined whether you were ready for the bigger battles that covenant would bring. Because when you marry him, the warfare won't stop. If anything, it will intensify. The enemy will attack your communication, your trust, your unity, your purpose. He'll use misunderstandings to create division, use past wounds to create present pain, use fear to create false narratives. And if you didn't learn to fight during the silence, you'll be defenseless during the storms. But if you learned to take every thought captive during that quiet season, you'll know how to protect your mind during marriage. If you learned to speak God's truth over your emotions during the silence, you'll know how to declare victory over your circumstances in covenant. If you learned to pray instead of panic during the pause, you'll know how to intercede instead of argue during conflict. The silence was warfare training. It taught you that your battle isn't against flesh and blood. It's not against him when he's processing or struggling or silent. It's against spiritual forces that want to destroy what God is building. During the silence, you had to learn to fight with spiritual weapons, prayer instead of pressure, faith instead of fear, God's truth instead of the enemy's lies, worship instead of worry. You discovered that your mouth is a weapon when you use it to declare God's promises. Your prayers are warfare when you use them to bind the enemy's plans. Your praise is power when you use it to shift the atmosphere. The woman who learned to fight during the silence becomes a prayer warrior in marriage. She doesn't just react to attacks. She responds with authority. She doesn't just survive battles. She wins them. She doesn't just endure warfare. She advances through it. When the enemy tries to create division, she prays for unity. When he tries to bring confusion, she declares clarity. When he attempts to steal their joy, she speaks life and hope. This is why the silence was so crucial. It wasn't just about developing patience or trust or discernment. It was about learning to fight spiritual battles with spiritual weapons. It was about discovering that you have authority in the realm of the Spirit. It was about realizing that what happens in the heavenlies determines what happens in your home. Now when you marry him, you won't just be a wife, you'll be a warrior, not fighting against him, but fighting for your covenant, your family, your destiny. Number 7. The silence was God's setup for supernatural breakthrough. Everything you've been through, every moment of confusion, every night of questions, every day of waiting, none of it was wasted. God has been setting up something supernatural, and the silence was the setup, you see. God doesn't just work in the obvious moments. He orchestrates breakthrough in the hidden places, the quiet spaces, the seasons that look like nothing is happening. While you were wondering why he wasn't texting, God was working on his heart. While you were questioning the silence, God was answering prayers you hadn't even prayed yet. While you were feeling forgotten, God was setting up a future that would blow your mind. The silence wasn't a delay. It was a divine setup. God was positioning pieces on a chessboard. You couldn't see. He was moving mountains you didn't know existed. He was opening doors you didn't even know were closed. He was preparing hearts, aligning circumstances, and orchestrating encounters. During the silence, he wasn't just processing his feelings. God was processing his character, his purpose, his readiness for the weight of loving you well. He was breaking generational patterns, healing father wounds, and establishing new foundations. He was teaching him things he could only learn in the quiet, showing him truths he could only receive in the stillness. And you weren't just waiting, you were being prepared for a love story that would make hell nervous. God was developing qualities in you that would make you irresistible to the right man and incompatible with the wrong one. He was building strength that would carry you through any storm, wisdom that would guide you through any decision, and faith that would sustain you through any season. The silence was the cocoon, and you're about to emerge as a butterfly. When the breakthrough comes, and it's coming, you'll understand why every moment of the process was necessary. You'll see how the silence shaped you, how the waiting prepared you, how the uncertainty strengthened your faith. You'll realize that God wasn't withholding good from you. He was preparing the best for you. The man who emerges from this season won't be the same man who went silent. He'll be stronger, clearer, more purposeful, more ready. And you won't be the same woman who was confused by his silence. You'll be wiser, more mature, more rooted, more ready. When God brings you back together, it won't be as two people trying to figure it out. It'll be as two people who've been prepared by the Master for something masterful. Your love story is about to shift from human to holy, from natural to supernatural. The silence was the setup for a breakthrough that will testimony to everyone who witnesses it. People will look at your marriage and see God's fingerprints all over it. They'll know that what you have couldn't have been orchestrated by man. It had to come from heaven, so don't curse the silence anymore. Bless it, thank God for it, because it was the setup for your supernatural breakthrough, family. If this message has stirred something in your spirit, if you feel like God has been speaking directly to your situation, I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button, because I'm going to keep bringing you the raw, unfiltered truth that sets people free. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, Because there's a woman somewhere who's been questioning God's plan because of a man's silence. And she needs to know that her breakthrough is coming. The silence isn't the end of your story. It's the setup for your testimony. You will marry him, but not until you finally understand what the silence meant. And now you do. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next one.